Okay, so I get asked this quite a bit, and with apparently there's a bunch of new information coming out in the next 48 hours or so on vaccines. So I want to get to some of these questions. One of the questions was, with all the new information that's coming out, how come people aren't changing their minds? Okay, this is a big deal. You have to understand. So there's a whole lot more orange man bad going on than I was expecting in this conversation, but a lot of people are not believing RFK. They're not believing everything because it's tied to the Trump White House, and so that's part of it. Hence the whole bunch of people taking Tylenol just to show it to the man and creating liver damage in themselves. Anyway, you have to understand there's a lot of parents who have seen damage to their children, and if they come out and admit that, yeah, vaccines might have something to do with it, then they have to admit that they played a role in the damage that happened to their children. And so in order to, that whole bad parent, bad decision, that type of thing. So psychologically, they will not allow themselves to go there. So it's going to be really, really difficult for those people to accept that there's a danger for other people's children. Because if they admit there's a danger for other people's children, they've got to admit that they messed up with theirs. So you've got that section. A lot of the doctors that are out there are in a worse position. They've been giving vaccines for 20, 30, 40 years. And they've been telling everybody, this is the best thing, they can't hurt anybody in any way. And there's all this research and there's, that proves they're safe, which was always a lie. And okay. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of doctors out there. It was apparently muted on the other one. There's a bunch of doctors out there who have been giving vaccines for a long time. And they're going to have to admit that what they were doing might have been hurting kids, and they can't deal with that. There's also a lot of doctors out there that this is how they make all their money. Bringing kids in for, well checks and vaccine visits and vaccine boosts and, and then, they're sick in this, they're going to have to deal with that. All the psoriasis and eczema and autism and other things that these doctors are seeing in their office, a little after vaccines, they said they couldn't ever be possibly connected to the vaccines. When this information comes out that it's directly related to the vaccines, they have to live with that and deal with that. And so the easiest way is to come out and say, no. I'm going to double down on my vaccine religion. And I'm going to tell you that man has made hundreds of chemicals that can cause no issues in any way, shape, or form ever, and only do miraculous good. Because that's the basis of vaccinology, is that vaccines are wholly perfectly good, and they're the only chemicals on earth. God's never been able to do it. If you drink too much water, you die. If you consume too much of anything, dose-wise, you die. But vaccines are special. Vaccines, you can give a 250-pound man the same dose you give a 20-week or 3-4-week-old newborn. That's maybe even preemie. That weighs 4 pounds. You can give that baby the same dose you give me, and it won't cause any problems with the baby. So doses aren't an issue. Ingredients aren't an issue. Heavy metals aren't an issue. Those are all that, as long as they're classified as vaccines, they're perfectly healthy and they can't hurt anybody ever, which was one of the big issues that we see with the COVID vaccine. These doctors that believe that vaccines by definition can't hurt anyone ever and have never hurt anybody ever, when they gave everybody the COVID vaccine, it caused all the death and all the problems, all the issues. They won't allow that to kind of register with them, which is why it's such a big issue, and why it took so many doctors so long to come out and be like, maybe the COVID vaccine is different, and maybe the COVID vaccine does cause a bunch of problems, but childhood vaccines don't cause any problems at all ever, and they never have and they never can. So you've got to factor all that stuff in. Just because new information comes out doesn't mean that people are going to accept it, because they've got to then now rationalize, what does that information mean about my entire life? All the chiropractors, all the natural health guys, all the people who were not making money off vaccines saw these problems in the 80s and 90s and were very, very, very loud about them in the 2000s. And they lost their licenses. They were bankrupted. They were kicked out of the community. They weren't allowed to speak. So anybody who did try to raise warning flags was silenced by the medical community. And so now we got to kind of go back and realize that all those people for this entire time that everybody was calling quacks because they didn't like vaccines or they thought maybe we should test them, they were right. And the medical community was wrong. And the medical community was pushing something that was highly toxic. So they have to kind of make amends with all of those things before they can come forward. So you're not going to see a whole lot of people who are, open with the idea that, oh, maybe these things are problematic. However, if you do have a doctor who was pro-vaccine and with all this information comes out and says, hey, I was wrong, we shouldn't be doing as many vaccines, or we should do more research, or we should do more study on the kids, or what, those are great doctors. Those are great people. The information those guys had was unbelievably biased. And it was from the people they thought they had to trust, their teachers and the CDC and the FDA. So that's what that is. So if you guys are worried about where it's going, give it some time. And hopefully the laws will change so that you don't have to poison your kids with useless dangers. So that's kind of where it is. Those are the questions I was getting on why people are so hesitant to believe that maybe vaccines can cause problems, but that's the real issue. If you guys have any other questions, hit up questions@chalmerswellness.com or drop them in the DMs. I'd love to hear what you guys think about what's going on with the vaccines and that type of thing now. All right. You guys have a fantastic day.